Hello, Nicole Steckline, Technical Agronomist for DeKalb and Asgrow in Northeast Iowa. And I'm coming to you from a cornfield in Northeast Iowa on July 18th with our second disease update. So, not seeing a whole lot of northern corn leaf blight, which is a little bit surprising given the amount of inoculum we've had out there building up for the last couple of years, as well as the weather that we've had. We haven't been overly hot, and in Northeast Iowa, we have had ample moisture to make that happen. However, what I am seeing a lot of is gray leaf spot, and it's happening here right as tassel begins, if not a little bit before. So I want to go through a little bit of gray leaf spot identification, as well as being able to spot lookalikes. So right here we've got a few different stages of gray leaf spot. So right here we've got some just starting. They're very small. They don't really have that rectangular shape quite yet. Here's another one right there. But if you look at this leaf for contrast, this is a nice mature rectangular gray leaf spot lesion. You can see from the front and the back. If you were to hold it up to the light, you would see along the edges a little bit of yellowing where it's showing where that lesion is going to continue to develop in length. So the importance of being able to tell what is and is not a disease is just as important as being able to identify which disease you have. So the spring earlier on and earlier this summer, I was seeing a lot of marks like this on the leaves, and if you backlit them, there's a lot of yellow coming up and down, so it almost looked like a disease spreading, and there was some speculation that it was possibly northern corn leaf blight. But I've been monitoring spots like these, and they haven't been getting any larger, which if they were northern corn leaf blight already, with the weather that we've had, we would have seen these getting larger. Also, when walking through hybrid plots, this is pretty common throughout all the different hybrids, all the different products. If it had been a disease, we would probably see it more prevalent in some numbers than other. I would say that this is either mechanical damage from these leaves being tied up really tight during a rapid growth period. Either that, or it could be some leaf burning caused by oil in a spray droplet getting down into the whorl. So here is another really good example of a gray leaf spot want-to-be. So they've got some dead tissue area. You can see that there's some light green, maybe yellowing on the margins of those spots. But if we hold up an actual gray leaf spot next to it, I think something that's really important to note is the color of those lesions. Where this one is kind of a little bit darker brown, the margins are extremely defined, and these they're not quite as defined. They're a lighter tan color, and then you can also see where there's almost some black speckling in there, just from that tissue being dead and damaged for a while. So a very common conversation around fungicides is timing of application. So there's some concern about arrested ear development, and also wanting to wait until brown silk to see the most yield response. So the concern around the arrested ear development comes from fungicides were first being sprayed in 2008 and 2009. And the link to non-ionic surfactant and an arrested ear development was not exactly made known, and so then the blame was placed on the fungicide. So when you make any sort of spray application, whether it's herbicide or fungicide, between V8 and full tassel, that's a time in the corn life when those ovules, those kernels, are being developed. If you get non-ionic surfactant in the wrong place with the wrong weather, you can have arrested ear development. So if you will be making a fungicide application before you hit full tassel, safest thing to do would be to pull that surfactant out of the mix. Now, brown silk timing. Brown silk is not actually a physiological stage in the corn plant's life. It's an indicator that we have full fertilization of the kernels and that those silks have dried up and died. So the studies that show that we get more yield response to fungicide when we wait until brown silk were shown in years when disease onset came later in the season. So therefore we were able to push off our residual, and therefore our prevention of diseases later into the season when we needed it the most. And then we didn't run out of residual. Now, years like the last 2 years when we had very heavy northern corn leaf blight pressure, early in the season, the middle to late June, earlier fungicide applications made with higher rates were the real money makers. In a year like this year, where the disease onset is kind of right on time with tasseling and pollination, waiting until we've got everything pollinated and fertilized, we are able to push our residual back further to the time when we need it. So we've touched on fungicide timing, but then there's the obvious question of, should I be spraying at all? Am I going to get my money back out of this fungicide application? And a lot of questions centering around that is, what is the threshold for these diseases? You know, how many lesions do I need to see, and on what part of the plant until I need to pull a trigger? And the answer is that, you know, each set of genetics responds differently to different diseases and different levels of diseases. There's a difference between disease tolerance and disease resistance. Resistance is the ability of that plant to not become infected, you know, the plant's ability to fight off infection. And tolerance is that plant's ability to continue to produce even in the presence of a disease. So if, you know, you're trying to make the decision on when, you know, whether you should pull the trigger on fungicides or not, whether you should make that investment or not, I think that there's a couple different things that we need to look at. First and foremost, crop potential. And here in Northeast Iowa, we still have very good potential. We've been picking up a lot of the rains that unfortunately many other areas of the Corn Belt have been missing. The other would be, what set of genetics do you have out there? Do they have good disease scores? Do they have disease showing up in them? And then also, do they have a response to fungicide even when there isn't any disease present? And then the other thing would be, do you have any other limiting factors? If you do not have enough nitrogen, then you will not get a full response out of a fungicide application. And then another thing would be to look at your crop rotation, if you've been corn on corn on corn for many years, and also what the disease pressure has been in that field historically. So we spent a lot of time talking about corn diseases and fungicide application on corn, but what about the soybeans? So this time of year, what I'm starting to see in Northeast Iowa is Septoria brown spot. We see this nearly every year. It's that disease that starts on those lower leaves, turns them yellow with those little brown spots, and they begin to fall off the plant. We see Septoria brown spot pretty well every year in Northeast Iowa. Also seeing a lot of bacterial blight. We can't do anything about the bacterial blight with the fungicide because the pathogen is a bacteria. I'm mostly seeing those in areas where it's been very wet, you've had water standing or water running over the plants. So the bacterial leaf blight is those areas that turn brown, and then they will actually fall out and defoliate those areas where it almost looks like an insect has come and eaten out part of those leaves. Something that I have not seen a whole lot of in the past, and that is more typical of southern Iowa as well as the southern Delta, is frog eye leaf spot. And I'm actually starting to see this fairly commonly so far. It's proven to be fairly significant as far as yield loss goes in southern Iowa, Missouri, and further south. So frog eye leaf spot will start as like brown dead tissue. It almost looks like burn from a herbicide application, but it's a deeper brown than if it was burnt by oil in herbicide. And then it's very irregular spots. You'll see some yellowing in those areas of the leaf where it's been infected, and then along the margins of those lesions, it's a little bit darker brown to kind of a red purplish color. If you start seeing frog eye leaf spot, give me a call. I think it's something that we need to keep an eye on, and definitely something that's going to drive some fungicide application.